welcome to the next episode of Called to the Bar, International Law Over Drinks, a series of informal conversations about current issues in international law, life in academia, and whatever else is on our mind. In these conversations, we are speaking off the cuff and without the benefit of footnotes, and nothing we say should be taken to have been thoroughly peer-reviewed. I'm Dr. Tamsin Phillipa Paige, Senior Lecturer at Deakin Law School, and I'm joined today by Dr. Juliana Santos de Carvalho, Isaac Newton Trust Academic Career Development Fellow in Gender Studies and Human, Social and Political Sciences, and the first Gender Studies Fellow at Downing College, Cambridge University. Today we are discussing Juliana's work on reading silences and shadows in international law and what hauntology is as a method. Juliana, before we get down to sifting through these fantastic questions on silences, shadows, and hauntings just in time for Halloween, and more importantly, what's your drink?
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for Halloween. I am that person. Anyways, but as a drink, as you know already, I have black coffee, not my usual bougie flat white of the morning. It's a black coffee that is made out of Brazilian beans because I am very stereotypically Brazilian, so I am very happy with that. So yeah, and what about yours?
So it's been a really warm day here in Canberra. I think it was about 27 in the shade, so it's kind of starting
Oh,
to get through spring and into summer. And it's evening now, but it's still warm. So I've got my usual go-to refreshing drink of mineral water with a twist of blood orange and mango, and I've put that over a lot of ice in my glass tonight, so it's delicious.
oh,
So
that's good.
yeah. So a fine tradition when people first appear here on the podcast is that we discuss how we got to know each other. So we first met when you were a PhD candidate at Geneva Grad Institute, when you reached out to the ANZL Gender and Sexuality and International Law interest group that I chair with Chloe and O'Hara to take part in our mentoring program as a mentee. I offered, with some uncertainty, to take on the role of mentor personally, while also offering to find you someone better. But you decided that I'd be fine as a mentor, and from there we met monthly for a year to talk about your career and what was happening. After that, we've stayed in touch as friends, colleagues, and dare I say, peers. Do you want to tell how this story looks from your perspective?
Yes. So when I hear your question about like finding someone, but I don't think that would ever be possible. And I will try not to be in this podcast like fangirling over you, but I will. I will. But like for me, it was just like, and you know this already because I keep telling you this, but it was such a crucial moment in my academic career and my academic development because I was like really struggling, especially because I don't have academic parents
Yeah.
and also like being a migrant in the global north, it's very difficult to navigate, and like all of the rules or like even the names are completely different than this in Brazil, and like you helped me not only actually like learn what I was doing or like where should I be going. But I think one of the most crucial things is that you helped me in my confidence. And like you sat down with me, like you read so the paper that just came out on the women, peace and security, you read that, you gave me comments, like even though you were not my supervisor, like you were just doing this out of like the goodness in your heart. And not only that, you really like helped me know what to do when I had some like stressful or difficult relationships in at work, and not only like at work but also like in academic writing. And you were like so crucial. And also we had banger conversations about pop culture. So like when I found out that you liked Celebrity Skin from Hole, I'm just like, yes, yes.
Who
So anyways,
doesn't
and
like that album?
that album is amazing. And not only that, we bonded over Daria, which is the most important thing, right? Daria is, yeah, it's
So
amazing. Anyways,
I'm gonna just show Juliana what's on my wall.
oh my God, yes, yes, of course. Oh yeah. I
So
today I would like I didn't go to the office today, but I was like planning on listening the Splendora album.
yeah,
Because I was just like, I just need a chill morning today. And anyways, but with that said, and going back to your question, I don't think there would be a better person to mentor me because I think everyone deserves a Tamsin in their lives. So
thank you.
just so you know, and you know this already because I keep telling you this.
You do.
Anyways,
You don't hold back, and it's really lovely, and I really appreciate it when
thank
I'm
you.
having a rough day when you have something nice to say about what I've done for your career. So I really always appreciate that. And in terms of what I was showing Juliana on my wall, I have a framed A4 shot from an episode of Daria that was in a Rolling Stone magazine in 1999. On the other side of that
Oh,
shot, there is actually a review of Garbage's second album.
oh my God. Oh, this is gold. This is so good. Anyways, I should be rewatching Daria actually. Like
Everyone
I'm
should be
pretty sure.
rewatching
I
Daria, but I think we're
know.
getting sidetracked.
Sorry,
So,
I'm sorry. I'm
no,
sorry.
don't
Yeah.
be. Let's keep going. So yes, this is the story as I remember it is pretty similar to how you remember it. You've just embellished a lot, very differently on what my role in our us meeting was. So, on the note of you were struggling with your confidence, you were struggling with how to navigate academia from having come from Brazil as a migrant and a black woman from Brazil, negotiating all of the global North academia through Europe and now UK, can you kind of give some context and kind of maybe some inspiration for other early career scholars who are listening? Talk about how you came to international
Yeah.
law, but also how you came to your position as the first gender studies fellow at Downing College. Like, that's huge. That's a really huge achievement.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyways, so just so people know a little bit of my background. So my dad is an airplane mechanic, and my mom is a secondary school teacher turned housewife, basically. Like she just she abandoned her career to take care of me and my sister. So definitely not the background that we usually know when we're talking to, students from international relations or international law. I might be biased here, but like this is what I've always encountered. It's just like I don't come from an academic background or a diplomatic background in Brazil, and also like I've been racialized all of my life. Brazil, I'm what we call brown. Basically, it's just like a mix, and we don't know. And so I'm definitely not white. And basically, like how I started is I had in mind that I wanted to do law for whatever reason. The 17-year-old in me didn't know better. And I started my studies. So I did my studies at the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil. So it's the northeastern part of Brazil. It's a public university. Lots of stray cats. I really miss the stray cats though. They were very cute. For people that do not know, the northeast region in Brazil is historically very disadvantaged. People from the south and southeast can be very xenophobic against us. But it was a very nice environment for me in the sense of like the people that I met there. Like my feminist gang was super nice and super radical. Radical in the good sense, not in the chirpy sense. It was nice, and especially because not only I was doing law school there, but I was also an academic secretary. So it's just like I really got into like knowing the workings of a public university with very very limited resources in Brazil. But so when I was doing law school, I hated everything. I just hated everything. I had 11 courses on civil law, which I think should be illegal. Really. I don't anyways.
What
But
even
the
is
thing
a
that
tort?
but
Isn't that just a cake?
but it's not even like tort, it's just like because it's civil law. So it's just like
Yeah.
I don't even remember. Like I've been 11 courses on 11? Yeah, 11 courses on civil law. Anyways, the ones that I liked the most was public international law and administrative law because I really like bureaucracy. I'm very boring. I mean,
Well,
like,
no, and for listeners out there who haven't thought it
yeah,
through, most human rights law in practice is a form of admin law. And so I tell that to my students a lot. If they're like, I want to do human rights, I'm like, then get do well in admin law because that's where, if you want to practice in human rights, most of your practice will be. So anyway, I'll let you keep
exactly.
going.
Yeah, exactly. Because you need to know like how the structure of the state works, like how the bureaucracies work. Otherwise, you don't get anything done. Anyway, so I like public international law, and in my 4 to 5 years of law school, that was the only course I really enjoyed. So I was like, you know what? Let's do this because it was like the when I was doing law school, I was sort of like lucky in the sense that it was just like during a time of the Workers' Party administration in Brazil where they injected a lot of money in public universities, and this was important for people like me because, for example, I could ask for my university's financial help to actually attend the Hague Academy course in international law. Like I couldn't have done this before that. So they helped me just to go to the Hague Academy. That was in 2015. And that was the year that Christian Chinking gave her course on human rights accountability for the United Nations. And I didn't really know that you could merge feminism with international law until then. So that was really important for me because I was just like, oh, I think I like this even more. So after finishing law school, I applied for the and I'm going to butcher the name now to the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, which is where I did my LLM in law in politics and international security. I did with a scholarship there. And I love that. Like shout out to my VU people. Love you guys. They have been super supportive and yeah, so, just extremely supportive throughout my academic career. And it was really nice because that's when I got into the very weird side of international legal scholarship. Like they do a lot of nice and like as you know like socio-legal research in international law and I did it and I was just like okay because until then I didn't know what I wanted to do with international law for my career. I remember that also in 2015 I had participated in a sort of like a human rights slash humanitarian law program to visit the West Bank. So I was really like torn between should I be a humanitarian worker? What should I do? And going at the VU was really the time that I was just like, oh, I think I like academia. I think I like research. But then when I was doing the LLM, I applied for the PhD. I got in, but I didn't get the scholarship. So I was just like, not possible. So I just took I just had like a period in between my second application for the PhD, where I tried to do like just like did a shitload of applications for international organizations because I was just like, you know what? If I want to be serious about academia, I at least need to know whether I want to work in an international organization at some point. And that's when I did my internship at the International Criminal Court, which was fantastic. I really loved it. There, I was actually not necessarily with the lawyers. I was with the investigators and the data analysts, which was really, really nice. And even though it was super nice, I was just like, I still like academia though. I don't know why. I'm
We're
still
all
like,
mad. We all like academia
yes,
here on this podcast, and we're all crazy because of it. You know, it's the
I know.
Alice in Wonderland, we're all mad here moment.
Yeah, I think it's the like it's the prerequisite, it's
Yeah.
just like not really thinking through about your choices in life and not really like understanding the consequences of
Yeah.
staying in.
Yeah. So
But
I assume you applied again and got your scholarship would be my guess.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I applied again, got my scholarship, and the rest is history.
Except for the fact that you defended your thesis about 9 months ago.
No, actually, on the 31st, Halloween, it's 1 year that I have defended my PhD.
That's
Wow.
fantastic. And then you moved. I know you did some sessional teaching work in, it was Amsterdam, wasn't it, that you were teaching
Yeah.
while you applied for postdocs and you got your current fellowship position through that kind of application process, didn't you?
Yeah. So again, the Vu people being the nicest people on earth. It was Tanya is also like she's my rock star. She's not on Twitter, but she was just like, "Hey, Juliana, come and teach with us for 6 months," and I was like, "Yes." But while I was teaching, it was actually like my first postdoc fellowship application, and I got really lucky that I completed. But it was, as you know, it was in gender studies. It was, I am not with international lawyers. I am actually at the Politics and International Studies department here at Cambridge, which is where the University of Cambridge Center for Gender Studies is housed. And it's such an interesting thing because like with the BU, I was teaching public international law. I was doing like the sort of like preparing students for moot courts, etc. And here at the Center for Gender Studies, so last week I was teaching on feministic colonial theory. So it's a completely different environment, and it's also like uh yeah, I just really enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So we're going to move to the main event now. And
Yes.
you work in queer and feminist spaces, as you know, we've kind of already discussed. You're in a gender studies thing, and you've looked a lot at the women, peace, and security agenda, or as I like to call it, the UN girl boss agenda. Um, and you've looked at the construction of the Rome Statute and Crimes Against Humanity statute, and particularly how they frame or don't frame what they mean by gender. So today we're going to talk about some of the methodologies and techniques that you've developed through that scholarship and how they can be applicable to international law more generally beyond what you're doing in this women, peace, and security space and this feminist international law space. So, namely, and as I said, just in time for Halloween, these are reading silences in international law discourse and reading the shadow of legality that haunts some quasi-legal regimes. So, I've got two questions for you here, and I'll let you choose how you approach them. So the first one is, how are silences in international law read traditionally and critically? And what does your alternative third option for reading these look like, and what does that mean for international law? And my other question is, what does it mean for some quasi-legal regimes like the Women, Peace and Security agenda to exist in the shadow of legality? And how can hauntology help us as a method to understand the impact of these shadows?
All right. So Um, I think I'll begin with the first on how silences are read in international law and what exactly I did in my reading. So and again, going back to the disclaimer of this podcast, not everything is peer reviewed, but this part has been peer reviewed because like uh when I was working on the proposed non-definition of gender for the Crimes Against Humanity Convention draft. For those who do not know, there's this talk about having a convention on crimes against humanity for states to just as a treaty for states to apply domestically. And there has been quite a debate, especially because when the International Law Commission was drafting the convention, they replicated the Rome Statute definition on gender, which historically has been criticized by feminists because It says that gender is the two sexes, male and female, within the context of society. Some feminists argue that this would conflate gender and sex. Some feminists would actually say, well, not necessarily, because the last part, within the context of society, would allow us to read sex within the context of society, so as socially read, right? So basically, like seeing the morphological differences, whatever that means, socially. And when the ILC replicated, you had like a huge campaign by feminists and LGBTQ plus activists and saying, hey, I don't think that definition holds water anymore. Maybe just update it or just leave it undefined. So, for example, race or other status are not defined, not in the Rome Statute and the Draft Convention. So, why would you define gender? And when I was reading this as a PhD student, I thought it was really interesting that option of leaving gender undefined, right? So just like, why should we? And at least when you're talking about absences in international law or silences in international law, things that don't get to the text or that don't get to be defined, at least critically, you see it with a certain suspicion. So, for example, feminists or Twale scholars, when they see silences, they're like, okay, that's when you can spot the exclusions and the oppressions being really exercised. And this is, for example, when you think about the Can the Subaltern Speak from Spivak, you don't have to read that text, but it's just like it's really that thing of just like when you're being silenced or when you cannot speak, that's a really oppressive sort of like environment for you. But there was another paper that I found, which is like, can the subaltern remain silent? And I thought that was really interesting in the sense of sometimes.
Before we move on to that,
Oh, yes, sorry.
if critical scholars are looking at silences as a mark of oppression,
Mm-hmm.
how does that then, traditional readings of silences in international law are usually read as an acquiescence. So how does that fit into
Yes.
what you're doing here? Like that traditional reading, how does that fit with the
Yeah.
critical reading?
Yeah. Thank you for this. Sorry for the traditional scholars. I was going to that, but then I got sidetracked. But uh, also, when you're reading silences in international law, you read it. At least what I found in my research is that there's a lot of talk in relation to custom building, right? So when you're not the persistent objector, as in like you're not vocal about your objection towards that rule, then you acquiesce. That is a very complicated word for me to pronounce. Anyways, then it's just like uh, you're like you're letting it go. So it's not necessarily like you are exercising your agency, but in a very passive way, right? It's just like, yeah, I don't really mind about this, so I'll just leave that practice to
We saw a lot
consolidate
of
as a
that.
custom.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of that approach to silences, particularly um, even in the pre-League of Nations era, so kind of Victorian colonial British dominance, where silences for fear of the Royal Navy were taken as acquiescences to Britain's interpretation of international law. So yeah, that's kind of the best example I can think of that kind of evidence of silence being taken as acquiescence.
Yeah, and I think it really connects to the critical reading. And now I'm thinking, because it's just like not only acquiescence, but it's also like, okay, you will remain silent here, because you need to accept how this custom has been constructed even before you joined the community of nations or whatever. So it's that sort of thing. It's just like you're not. It's not even that you're not allowed to speak, but there's like not even a place for you to speak at all. So I think like at least the way that I saw it, from the traditional to the critical, silences is silences are read in very negative terms, negative in the sense of exclusion, but also negative in the sense of like I am not going to. It's not necessarily like an active exercise of agency, so as to say. It's like you're not being vocal. You're not really acting on something. You're just letting it go.
Yeah, you're just accepting it.
Yes, you're just accepting. So it's not necessarily something that so that's what I say. It's just like it's read in negative terms, as in either negative from a more exclusion side to a more agency side. That is at all not sophisticated. I swear that in my paper I do it in nicer terms. But the way that I read it was just like sometimes you can really have silence as resistance, you know? And I really wanted this for two reasons. Because, for example, when you tell the kids don't talk to the cops, it's just like it's a way of like exercising silence as agency, as survival, or even, for example, you have, and this is something that I argued with Lily, and they're a wonderful activists. They're working with the advocacy behind the Crimes Against Humanity convention. Is that in a lot of the times marginalized individuals are forced to say like, what are you, right? Like, so you have this with gender non-conforming people. It's just like, okay, what are you? Like, define yourself. Or even like when you are at a court, you need to explain yourself, right? Whereas people who are conforming, they don't have to explain anything. The people just let them be, right? Or for example, and yeah, so it's just it's that idea that, like, you don't have to explain yourself when you're an authority.
Yeah.
People just know who you are. When you are not.
Yeah, when you conform to the hegemonic expectations, you don't need to explain yourself. So how does that refusal to explain yourself that you're talking about here, which is a really interesting concept, what does that then mean for international law?
For me, the way that I saw it is that first, by imposing a definition, like, you have sort of like a limitation, and especially like when you're dealing with issues of gender, this limitation is going to bite you in the end. Because if you really take the consideration that gender is socially constructed, it means that it is dynamic, it is contextually specific. So it doesn't matter how much you want to define it, it's always going to escape that definition. And a lot of the times when it escapes that definition and you have a very defined definition in the first time, it's going to affect gender non-conforming people the most. So, for example, you see with the women, peace, and security agenda, or even like with the Rome Statute, that when you have sort of like a definition which is like some sort of like referring to a binary system, that's going to hurt the gender non-conforming people the most. It's just like it's always just like the weakest link that's going to suffer the most from any sort of like attempt at definition that you have. And the other thing is that I read is just like, and I think this is also very much like in line with what the campaign was, is that you don't have to define it in the sense of gender has been studied and has been sort of like conceptualized by human rights treaty bodies and by jurisprudence for a long time. It's not 1998 anymore. So when you're not defining, you can actually say, hey, I'm not defining, but I'm actually letting you know that you need to refer to the work that has already been done. Otherwise, this is going to be legally inconsistent, right? You're not having a systemic approach to your interpretation. So you're actually being a very bad legal job. So I think that that's how I read of like the potentiality of that sort of silence is not only to uh leave something mobile enough to for its users, so we can actually like account for evolutions in the interpretation should they rise, and like also the differences that you have among different contexts, but also just like it's sort of like um, a reminder, just like, hey, you actually have a whole body of work, both in legal spaces and in non-legal spaces that have already explained that term, and you need to refer to that. Otherwise, you're just being a bad lawyer, I
And,
guess.
and I
That makes
suppose,
sense.
yeah, and from the context of where I've done a lot of work, which is Article 39 of the Charter, we already have this system from the advent of the UN with threat to the peace. There is
Yes.
no strict definition of threat to the peace. We leave it there for the Security Council, predominantly the P5, to discuss whether or not something is a threat to the peace, and that evolves over time, and we've seen, as I said, an ever expanding understanding of
Yeah.
what can be a threat to the peace as global social conditions have changed. So yeah, this is not a new idea. It's just moving it from where intentionally undefined it's been done, but it's then now looking at this whole intentional lack of definition as rather than an approach to exclude, it's looking at it as a site of potential and inclusion.
Yes, yes. And not only a sign of inclusion, but also like it shifts the burden, right? It's not it's now it's just like not the necessarily like the gender non-conforming people that have to explain themselves into international law so they can actually be included. It's actually like the people that are going to apply the definition that really need to show that they know what they're talking about when they're doing that sort of application. And of course, like I am aware that the silence or a non-definition of gender uh, has the potential of being co-opted, especially by more gender conservative states, etc. So that's why I think it's so important for us to, was something that was done by the campaign, uh, to to um to argue that it is a non-definition, but it's a non-definition that comes with a certain baggage and that it speaks for itself. That you really need to like revert back, otherwise, your job is incomplete.
Yeah, so it speaks
Yeah,
for it's taking
as
silence for the same way we don't ask for an exhaustive
yes,
definition of race or religion. We take that as a social reality that people,
yeah,
know they understand what it is because it's well explained in society anyway.
yeah, and I think like your your point about Article 39 is it's exactly what I mean, because it's just like it's not we don't have a very precise definition, but it's not like you have to throw in whatever you think it is, because you actually have like this whole background to it. So yeah.
Yeah.
And please go and check Tim's work on Article 39, because it's also like a fucking masterclass on methodology. Like, to all the people out there, if you really want to know how to actually like do proper methods, Tamsin. Sorry, will
I
not
am
fangirl of you.
I am
Yes.
apparently known as Method Girl. That's my superhero identity. So yeah, let's go with that. So moving on now to the other half of this, which is we've looked at the silences. Let's look at the shadows. So what do we
Yeah.
mean by things like the women, peace, and security existing, so gender existing in the shadow of legality? And you've used hauntology to explore that. So what does then hauntology do as a method for exploring this shadow of legality idea in quasi-legal regimes?
Yeah. So the women, peace, and security. Well, let's start. So I the thing is just like the women, peace, and security thing was was especially like the legality or the non-legality of it was what drew me to the PhD in the first place. I think I was just like just so curious about it, that I just decided to to spend 4 years working on it. As you do, right? Anyways, but I think it's just like, I always tell this story because it's just like I really wanted to work on the women, peace, and security agenda for whatever reason. And when I was doing the law and politics of international security LLM, I knew that with the women, peace, and security, you had the politics, but what about the law, right? And I needed to do a master's on it. So, and I saw that at least like international legal circles, um, we knew that the legality of WPS is weird, right?
I
it's
would
just like,
call it quasi-legal. It's not actually
yeah,
legal, but it looks like law.
exactly. It's that thing of just like it looks like what law, it quacks like law. Is it law?
No, it's a
And I was
goose.
that would be nice actually. That would be a very. Anyways, let's not talk about. Yeah, don't start because you know I will take it very seriously and just like my next paper will be just like geese of law. Just kidding. I won't do it. But anyways, uh, but I think it's just like I was so obsessed with that sort of like question. It's just like, is it law? And I really wanted to have an answer to it. And the thing for me was like, and I think it really broke me at some point in the PhD. It was just like I couldn't come with a question for it. Like, especially like I remember there was every time people say, "Oh, but you can solve this by citing Fuller or like analyzing Fuller." I'm like, no, you cannot. I have read that dude, and it like those principles make no fucking sense. Anyways, sorry. Um, but what I'm saying is like you have so many different ways to approach law and so many like different sort of answers to it that at some point I stopped looking at this necessity to really like define what law is and like using the WPS as an example, but really trying to sort the mess out and see what the mess actually generates. So I think it's just like I would always joke that in my PhD, my main argument is very simple. It's just like people think differently. And that is like that defines my whole PhD, but it's just like people think differently of what they mean by law. And I am not here trying to correct them or say, actually, you're wrong because no, I'm just like, okay, when these people like sit together and start discussing, and when no one actually agrees what law is, what happens?
So
Right?
is
And
that
I
what you
think,
mean by the shadow of legality is where you have that
yes,
situation where law sits as these shadows over the whole discussion, but no one actually knows what it is that they're looking at?
no, no one does. And it's just like it's there, right? You can sense that there's something, and people can point at it. It's just like, oh, look, this is the law, but it's just like it's sort of like no one knows what it is. Sometimes people are scared of it. It's just like it's there, and people just like discuss and do things while being haunted by it. And with the WPS, what I actually did, it was just like um, first I analyzed how Resolution 1325, which for those who do not know is the first resolution that sort of starts the whole Women Peace Security agenda, because the Women Peace Security agenda is a series of resolutions from the Security Council, with 1325 being the first one. So I wanted to locate first like how this legality idea first started, like how it entered, right? Because a lot of the times people say, oh, I have my personal pet peeve. People say, oh yeah, the feminists really wanted to make law and that's why they went to the Security Council. I'm like, no, 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 no. Yeah, no, I've seen that. I've seen that argument. I swear to you. And I'm like, no, it cannot be. It makes no sense. And when I was talking to people that really negotiated that were in the room, a lot of the times they were just like, "Nah, we didn't think about legality in the first place. We just wanted to get into the Security Council and make something very big. But then when we realized that we were actually getting a resolution, that's when people are just like, okay, what's it going to be? Is it actually going to be like a legal obligation on states? And that's when the shadow of legality sort of like pops up, right? And it starts like haunting the feminists, and it also starts becoming scarier and scarier as dynamics in the Security Council start to change, right? And again, going back to your amazing work, which I was just like, yes, thank you, because just like the wimpy security is from the 2000s, so that's when the Security Council is just like, let's talk about human rights. And it was like being very prolific with the production of its resolutions. But as you move forward, especially after 9/11 and the consolidation of Russia as a superpower again, the dynamics start to change. And when you keep having these resolutions that sort of like look like law and quack like law, the legality starts getting like scarier and scarier. So that's when this is the second part of the paper where I actually say, well, when the legality starts to like haunt even more, especially like within that that context, what happens? And that's when I argue that by being haunted by shadows, you become a shadow in and of itself. That's a weird argument. I know it. But you know what? I just wanted to stretch the metaphor.
And what do you mean? What do you mean by that? That the being haunted by shadows turns you into a shadow yourself? Because it actually sounds really similar to the old adage of "Beware ye who slay monsters, lest you become a monster yourself." So, talk me through what it means to then how hauntology led you to this idea that if you keep being haunted by shadows, you become the shadow.
Yeah, I think that it's that when we started like talking about, okay, you have first like the shadow of legality sitting there and no one knows what it is, and people are like sort of like scared of this uncertainty. And I think that as the way that I read the evolution of this the WPS, whatever that means, it's just like people start embracing the uncertainty, right? It's just like, okay, what if we made this even more complex and even more complicated? Because this can actually like be very strategic, right? And I think that I began my paper by saying like it was the first time when I was actually like talking to an NGO worker about my WPS legality sort of obsession, and I was like, "Do you think it's law?" And I remember the worker saying to me like, "No one cares about this. Like, why would you care about this? This is such like a formalistic, legalistic detail that it's just like it doesn't really like we don't mind." And I think it's just like embracing that sort of uncertainty and making the thing even more uncertain, because like with the subsequent resolutions, you start adding like, for example, the threat of having sanctions because of conflict related sexual violence, which like people would say, okay, that's becoming more and more of like enforceable, so like closer to the coercive side of law, etc. Or even like linking it to legal obligations in themselves. So just like, okay, you have to respect what we're saying here because this actually links to this and this treaty. But at the same time, also like, anyways, it becomes a mess, right? And it becomes bigger and bigger. And I think that for me, that's when the WPS becomes a shadow of legality, like as the most exemplary example. I don't know, English is failing. Anyways, a very like symbolic example of a shadowy legality, because you just don't know what it is. And I just find it interesting not to really like assess the legality of it, but just to again like see how the mess is created and what the mess actually like produces.
So to kind of sum up what you're saying here is that the hauntology as a method allows you to look at how the shadow of legality started over the WPS agenda in this instance, where it was sitting in this quasi-legal shadow of legality space, but the
Yeah.
hauntology method allowed you to then trace where it became
Yeah.
actually a part of the shadows rather than the shadows casting itself over the agenda.
Yes, that is beautiful though. That is much better than I would ever write it. And I will note it down because if this thing ever turns into a book, I will use this. And I'm like, footnote, this was Tam's.
Look, it'll
Thank
be
you.
an you can just reference the episode of Called to the Bar.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. Oh, this is a thank you. Thank you. Again, everyone needs a Tamsin in their lives. You see, that is the very like that is a very good illustration of why.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've wrapped up kind of what
Yeah.
you wanted to say about silences and shadows and hauntings. Did you have a
Yes.
question for me?
Oh, I do, but Jesus Christ. Fire alarm. Can you hear this? Okay, I'm
No, I can
sorry.
hear no fire alarm.
Okay, I'm so sorry for the listeners and for whoever's editing, but the UK is sort of obsessed with fire and they test it every week. So that was a test just now. Sorry. Anyways, I have a question. Yes. So my question really relates to you know it. It's one of my favorite papers that you wrote, which is the horror that lost everything. And you know that it should win best title of the decade by far. I love that. And in that paper, you have a very amazing excerpt where you argue, and I'm going to quote it in full because I think it's so beautiful and it really encapsulates like what I love about doing research. So you have this tyranny of law, quiet and insidious. It's possible because conceiving of law as horizontal and performative does not mean that it is a social construction born out of equal power structures. Law is applied instrument that allows those with power to regulate all other aspects of society in order to enable, uh, quotation marks, relatively powerful people to reduce the costs and dangers of dealing with one another while confirming and facilitating the subjugation of less powerful people to the advantage of the more powerful. And again, I really love this quote because I see that we do very like similar things of not just looking law for whatever it's like right in front of us, but really like getting a lot of like other sort of like ways of looking at society and looking at law as part of society and what kind of insights we can reach. And of course, like here is a lot of like there's a lot of your sociological training. And I wanted to ask you what kind of good and bad surprises your sociological training has allowed you to find in your research. Because I think like this quote really like uh demonstrates a lot of like how you can analyze law from a social legal perspective. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about your surprises of using social legal methods in your research. Thank you.
Yeah. So, as we've already discussed, I'm kind of method girl. And that comes with its good and its bads. It means that I see a lot of papers that brand themselves as socio-legal that if I had have been the reviewer, I would have, or editor, I would have desk rejected for invalid data. Lawyers are really bad at data handling. Data and lawyers don't care about data integrity, and we see this with how courts deal with data as well. They're terrible at it. Um, really, really bad. Like objectively, I have absolute nightmares over some of the data handling I've seen in papers that have been published. I'm like, fucking hell, how did this get through reviewers and editors when right there, that footnote there is telling me that all your data is invalid and therefore the rest of your all of your arguments are null and void because I can't trust your data. And that's a huge problem that most lawyers who go into socio-legal spaces and methods pick it up post all their training, or they pick it up in their PhD. They don't have and they don't have the full training in why the method was developed. What was the method developed in response to? What theories informed the development of the method and all of these things? And they kind of then they just kind of take bits of the method and apply it to law without understanding why what they've done doesn't work. And it's it's my pet peeve. I kind of hate it. I've rejected a few papers because I've had to sit there and go, the data's invalid or the method's not consistent with what's been done in the paper. Um, or I've read a method section in a PhD that's a collection of buzzwords when the PhD was just like theory informed doctrine. Like, and it didn't, and it
Mhm.
had all these method buzzwords because the person felt they had to put it there. And there's this misunderstanding amongst particularly legal scholarship that method is a how question, and most people don't understand that they keep conflating method with theory. Theory is a how you look at the world question. Method is a how did you do your research question. It's literally a mechanical question. So, in terms of when I'm looking at it, you give me a mechanical summary of how you did your research, so I can then
Yeah.
come in as the reviewer and go, yes, this paper is structurally sound. We can let people live in it. To use the kind of engineer inspecting a house or a bridge of like, yes, this is sound. I can see how it was all constructed. And that's what method is.
Mhm.
And there's the deep misunderstanding in law about this. And as a sociologist who works in legal spaces, I have nightmares looking at the some of the stuff I see around method that I in law things. And like lawyer, and the biggest indicator of that is you go to a law and society conference, and a sociologist will present, and they'll spend their whole presentation setting up why their data has integrity, so you can trust their conclusions. And all the lawyers are sitting there going, "Shut the fuck up and give me the conclusions. That's what's interesting. Don't care about your data integrity. If I'm sure it's fine. Just give me the conclusions and the useful bit." And this shows out when legal method is let's take a whole bunch of outlier cases that are really outliers and construct a
Yeah.
general principle of how law operates in society on the basis of these wild outliers. And it's just, I have nightmares over how some of that gets done and how some of that works. It's a real struggle. So that's the bad. The
Yeah.
bad is that in my experience, it means that I'm really sensitive to when legal scholars are doing stuff that they don't actually understand, but understand just enough to think that they understand it. And you get
Mhm.
some some scholarship that looks really good if you don't realize that the data has no integrity. And
Yeah.
as soon as you realize that, you're like, oh, nothing can be trusted here.
Yeah.
And that's through no fault of that's not saying the researcher's conclusions are wrong. They're not actually established by the data because of a lack of data integrity. And that could have easily been rectified because
Mhm.
the data may be fine, but I can't see that it is. And so
Yeah.
that's the bad. The good is that I get to bring a really different perspective to law. So
Yeah.
the paper you mentioned, Um, the whore that lost everything. I'm using a law and I'm using Black Sails as a social discourse text to explore how law, a lot of people who are affected by law are making rational responses of resistance to their lack of power in a legal space. It's really pushing
Mhm.
back against the idea of the equality before the law and the idea that um, people who choose a life of criminality and of rejection of law are doing so out of some form of deviance. I'm making the argument
Mhm.
that they're doing it as a rational response to powerlessness. And It's really hard to see that if you're just coming at law from a doctrinal framework. It's really hard to see that if you're kind of coming from just a traditional legal training to see that the acts of people who are are wholesale rejecting law and wholesale rejecting the social construction of law that governs society are doing so out of a rational response to how society has marginalized them. And
Yeah.
that's the real benefit. That's the good thing. I have lots of different tools to explore that. So in that paper, I do it through social discourse texts and conceptual sociology.
Yeah.
But when I looked at Somali pirate counter piracy and the role of law in that, I did it empirically. I had empirical studies around with, interviews, observations, as well as historical research on
Hmm.
what does law do, and I was able to sit there and go, law does fucking nothing here to change the
Yeah.
situation. What changes the situation is changing the economic circumstances, because until you change the economic circumstances, it doesn't matter how much law you have. The threat of criminal sanction means nothing if you can't feed your family.
Yes.
And that kind of idea of looking at it really differently, of going, what will fix this problem of systemic criminal behavior is changing the economic circumstances so the crime is no longer a good economic option. And it's really
Hmm.
hard for lawyers to get to that conclusion because, when what you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if all you've got is law, and in piracy,
Yeah.
we saw that where everyone was debating how do we define Article 101 of UNCLOS? How do we define Article 105 of UNCLOS around universal jurisdiction? Side note, it's not universal jurisdiction, it's concurrent municipal jurisdiction because universal jurisdiction demands that there is no territorial limit to your jurisdiction, which Article 105 of UNCLOS has a strict territorial limit. And so there's a lot of argument and debate about this, but as I came out as a sociologist and go, this is a really shit situation. And all you idiots are just arguing over, well, what is the law? I'm like, who gives a fuck what the law is? What does the law do here? And so and I say that with all due respect to my dear friend Douglas and co-host Douglas, who I co-author stuff on piracy with, who is one of the what is the law people on this. Um, I say that with all due respect, but I'm like, I hit a point where I'm like, I just don't give a fuck about your debates about what is the law. The law's clear enough that what matters is what does the law do? And that's where
Yeah.
so much of my sociology research allows me to move that question of, well, what is the law to what does the law do when we use it? And that's a
Yeah.
really different question that I think lawyers are actually really bad at answering because of that tendency in legal training of you're making an argument. You are making an
Hmm.
argument to win a case. And so most of your legal training teaches you to pick outliers and cherry pick information and outliers that will help you make your case and win your argument.
Yeah.
And that's really good for legal advocacy and for legal argument. It's really bad for understanding what is happening with a law on the ground broadly. And I think that that's the really good thing that my sociological training allows me to do is allows me to move from these questions of what is law to what does law do? And what does law do when it never sees a courtroom? What does law do when it never sees the cops showing up and, a cab? As much as I love dogs, including the dogs and horses, they're still cops. A cab. What does it do when it never sees that? Like, what happens when someone who's lived in, poverty their whole life gets an eviction notice that is technically unlawful, but they can't do anything to fight that because they can't risk being blacklisted on a tenant's blacklist. They can't afford the time and money it takes to take their landlord to the administrative tribunal to fight the eviction. They can't do any of those things. That's why it never sees any formal enforcement. But it still does things. And it allows me to start answering those sorts of questions.
Thank you.
Does that
Thank you.
answer your question?
It does. And I think just like it's really clear from the quote of the paper of just like how not only knowing your methods, like knowing what to do to actually study the law, but also like knowing what kind of questions a socio-legal perspective allows you to move from the what the law is to what does the law do, especially like two people. I think it really like having this is what allows you to have these conclusions about, and I'm going to quote again, like law is applying an instrument that allows those with power to regulate all other aspects of society in order to enable relatively powerful people to reduce the costs and dangers of dealing with one another while confirming and facilitating the subjugation of less powerful people to the advantage of the more powerful. Like this is like this is how I see you doing your social legal work. Is just like this is what allows you to actually come to these conclusions. And I think in my work, I not as masterfully as this, but just like that shift between what the law is to what does the law do is really important. And I think like for me, it's like the most interesting question. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you.
No,
Yeah.
it's been great. So we're coming to the end of our time, and we, as always, we have some wrap-up questions for our guest. And so
Mhm.
we have three questions here. You can answer them in any order you choose. What recommendations do you have for anyone who would like to know more about what we've discussed today, beyond the two Leiden Journal of International Law papers you've published that kind of led to this conversation? And we'll put the references to those in the show notes. But what
Thank
other
you.
suggestions do you have for people to read who want to know more about this? What are you working on at the moment? And what's your current escape route? What are you reading or viewing or doing to take your mind off international law?
Okay. So what recommendations do I have for anyone? Um, and I'm like, witchcraft, just kidding. Because it's shadows and silence. No, just but again, if you want to go for witchcraft, by all means, it's something that can really help you in your research. Um, but I think for me, the the two sources that um really helped me, and first, embracing that sometimes you don't when you have a question and you fail at answering it by uh, in every try, such as like, is the WPS law, is The Queer Art of Failure by Jack Halberstam, because I think it's such an interesting sort of take of just like embrace your failures and be creative with what you find. And I think just like really like that sort of creativity that um, really is something that that I take center stage in my research. And the other one is, and I'm going to cite her. My students know that I'm like, yeah, I'm fan number one, but it's Maria Lugones. And I think like her decolonial approach to feminism is something that I really hold to heart in the sense of like working with playfulness and working with really like trying to dismantle the ways that we usually do for producing knowledge is something that is really important for me. And I think that I take this playfulness and I take like, okay, let's stretch this metaphor or let's use weird sort of concepts such as shadows. I also use drag in another paper or silences. It's something that I do it as someone who comes from an unprivileged background because it helps me understand law better. Because if I were to like write about law using, I don't know, now people are going to get at me, but like using Kelsen or Fuller or etc., I can do that. Like, mind you, like I did that for my master's, but I want to open up the discussion through more accessible ways. And I think playfulness can really help because I'm always thinking of myself as an educator first. So I want to like tell my students, hey, how can you understand international lawmaking or sources? And I think they really like vibe with the idea of like trying to understand international lawmaking through drag, or trying to understand how no one agrees about what international laws are through the notion of shadows. And I think it's just like really like this playfulness allows you to make international law more accessible for everyone that wants to study. All right. What am I working at the moment? Right now, I am in the middle of the term here at Cambridge, and I am not working on anything like research specific. I'm just trying not to sound like a jerk when I tell my undergrads that realism in international relations makes no sense. At least for me. At least for me. This is my opinion. But I think like I want to work on this is I've been talking with a very good friend Alonso Gourmendi. A shout out to him. He I wanted to do a paper that looks at how women have decided on use of issues on the use of force at the ICJ to like shatter that idea that women are more peaceful and they're going to like be more I'm trying to do, as you said, like very methodologically sound, like analyzing coding, etc. This is a project that I wanted to work on. And of course, like I sent out my PhD for as a book proposal, and I'm just waiting for the review. So reviewer, if you're listening to this, help me out. Thanks. um
I got sent that PhD proposal, that book proposal to read, and I had to say to CUP, love to. I'm a little biased. Juliana and I go way back, and they're like, "Oh, you can't review that." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say."
So yeah, the reviewers out there, take my book proposal with the goodness of your hearts. I tried my best, you know. My current scape. So I was thinking. So when I thought about this question, I'm just like, how can I answer this without uh losing any sort of respect that people have uh, uh on me? And I'm just like, I am never going to be taken seriously after this. But right now, I am, mind you, like, I am not an intellectual. I am not going to be like, oh, I've been watching these No, no, no. I consume trash. Like, you know me. Like, it's just like reality TV shows and like that's what I do. But right now, I've been sort of like hooked on fanfics again. I listen. I used to like devour them when I was a teen,
Yeah.
and now I'm reading because like you have some very good writing, very good
So
humor, like character development.
I would also like to point out that Seanan Maguire, who holds the record for the most concurrent Hugo nominations, started her career in fanfic. Yeah,
Fanfics are great.
and Joanne, who you met at the Kill 2
Yes,
workshop, is
amazing.
writing her thesis on alternative judgments as legal fanfic.
Oh yes, Joanne. I remember
So
those.
like
So
I'm not
amazing.
here to trash fanfic. Yeah,
Uh,
one of
I
my favorite
I
authors started in fanfic, and I've got a PhD working on old judgment projects as fanfic, and I am here for it.
Oh, I'm going to defend it with everything in my heart. Like Archive of Our Own is my homepage now. I just love fanfics. Yeah, and sometimes I'm just like, because I one of my favorite fanfics at the moment. The author posted 2 chapters yesterday, and like I was so happy. I was just like, yes. Anyway, so at the moment, I've been reading a lot of fanfics. So
And what universe of fanfic are we working in?
So I've been on a hyperfixation with Baldur's Gate 3 for the
Okay.
past like
Yeah.
yeah, 1.5 months because the former hyperfixation was on Zelda because
Yeah.
it's all the games that I play with my partner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been reading a lot of fanfics, and of course I know you would judge me because I romance Gale. So it's a lot
I'm
of fanfics
judging
about
you
Gale.
so hard for that.
You cannot judge me because you romance Shadowheart, okay?
Shadow Hearts,
Okay?
Shadowheart is a cutie pie. But on that note, we
Yeah.
can probably bring
Okay.
the episode to an end. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll speak to you next time. Bye bye.